knows that it is recorded because you're going to be told right now. Okay, so anything you put in the chat or anything that you say will be recorded. So keep that in mind in the back of your head. So this meeting is the wonderful wild of Texas, a herping big year. Well, we've all probably heard of the big year. They made a movie out of it. And I think the next one is going to be with Romey starring as the herper big year person. Maybe it'll be another hit. We don't know. But our presenter tonight is Romey Swanson. He's the Director of Conservation Strategy at Audubon, Texas. Now, what does that mean? That's a wonderful title. He works with state, national, and international partners to identify and advance important conservation strategies to benefit birds, landscapes, and the communities that depend on them. And that's all of us, folks. We all depend on that. So Romey's got a big job, but when he's not doing that job, he's hanging out in Austin and spending time with his family, hunting, camping, and photographing wildlife. And you'll see some of his photos in this presentation. Now he's going to talk a little bit. I mean, come on, he's a herper, he's a birder, he's a naturalist. He loves it all. So it's going to be pretty wide ranging. And he's going to talk about some conservation challenges that Texas faces and some of the things that we can celebrate that we are making progress on. So we'll be interested in that. But, you know, this is the herping big year, and it's going to talk about his efforts to find and document as many species of reptiles and amphibians as possible in Texas during 2021. Well, a lot of us spend a lot of time trying to avoid these creatures, but they are fantastic. We always tell people when we work at the zoo that you may not like, there is a place for all these creatures. You may not want them in your place, but they are very important in our ecosystem, and they're often poorly understood and maligned. So Romey's going to change all that for us tonight. So I'm going to mute myself and turn it over to Romey and stop my share so he can start his.
Well, thank you, Patsy. You all hear me? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Okay, Patsy gave me a thumbs up. Great. I'm going to share my screen to kick this presentation off, and we'll start from the beginning. So, Patsy, give me one more thumbs up if you're seeing a copperhead. Okay, great. Wonderful. So we're going to kick it off. Patsy, thank you for such a wonderful introduction. I would gladly like to take you with me whenever I'm giving a presentation forever, because I think I could use a hype person as good as you. Really appreciate it. I'm so glad to be here. I'm talking to kind of like the choir. We're all in this together. I work for Audubon, Texas, Bear Audubon, and all of the members and all the folks that are here as guests tonight appreciate birds and nature. So I won't make too big of a spiel, but you really should, and continue to support your conservation organizations, because we're all, like I said, in it together. We're speaking for the voiceless out there wandering around. I'm going to be talking about herps today, but I'm going to cue it up a little bit about what makes Texas so special for herps, for birds. We'll talk briefly about birds, and we'll talk about some of the conservation challenges that all of these animals face. I hope that you walk away from the presentation with an appreciation for a assemblage, a group of animals that are often overlooked, or as Patsy said, we often avoid, because there's some incredible diversity, color, and stories that exist all around us, and for sure parallels anything that we know about birds. I'll go ahead and advance the slides to talk about why Texas is so special. And this will be fast paced. I am a person that can talk for too long, take up too much oxygen out of a room, and I'm aware of it. So I'll speak more quickly to get through what should be a lot of material. Texas is kind of continentally placed in the center of the United States. So we have all of these great representations that are otherwise, more associated with the eastern portion of the U.S., kind of teetering in here, the eastern temperate forests, which come into this Blackland Prairie Post Oak kind of region of the state of Texas, certainly East Texas. We have plenty of Great Plains plenty of Great Plains representation through the central swath of the United States. And we even get some of the North American deserts there out in the Trans-Pecos ecoregion, west of the Pecos River. So, we have these continental ecosystems that sort of converge in the state of Texas. When we look at Texas on its own, we've been able to divide it. We've been able to draw some lines about anywhere from 10 to 12, depending upon which map you're looking at, of the different ecoregions. So we have a great representation. Those ecoregions are often represented by specific wildlife, plants, geological formations. We can kind of dial even further in on the vegetation and take a look at this vegetation cover type of Texas. And it looks like something a child would create if they got loose with a pack of crayons. It's very colorful, but it is illustrative of the fact that Texas has so much diversity. If you just look at the vegetation and cover types across across Texas, we have an incredible spectrum of elevation across the state. We have over 300 miles of coastal shoreline at 0 feet in elevation, all the way to peaks above 8,750 feet over here at our highest point in the Guadalupe Mountains. One of the more interesting facts to me is that the Davis Mountains range here around Jeff Davis County includes over 800 square miles of elevation. The footprint of elevation above 1 mile in elevation is over 800 square miles, an incredible footprint. Maybe you're not familiar with the Davis Mountains. Maybe you've been to Big Bend National Park and you've driven up into the Chisos Mountains and you were awestruck when you drove up into the basin there. For comparison purposes, the footprint of the Chisos above 1 mile in elevation is only 12 square miles. So 800 square miles of elevation above 1 mile throughout the Davises. Truly incredible. And then we have a very wide spectrum of rainfall. So we get sometimes over 60 inches down here in the southeast portion of the state near Beaumont, less than 12 inches back towards El Paso. You can actually see some of the rain shadows associated with the mountains, like the Davis Mountains here, where there's a little bit more rainfall. And that supports a very unique ecosystem. We often call them the Sky Islands in a desert sea. And there are vegetation, forests associated with those rain gradients, associated with those elevations. It truly creates a very fascinating and interesting opportunity in one state. Of course, it's a very wide state. It's a very tall state, often taking a day to drive across, or from Brownsville, back up towards Amarillo. You're probably going to have to take a break to get across the state if you're driving. As a matter of fact, I remember seeing a road sign recently that must be just outside of Texas that says Beaumont 24 miles, El Paso tomorrow. Doesn't even tell you how many miles. It's tomorrow. You're not getting there today. So you can see this incredible diversity, and you don't necessarily have to just look at maps. I mean, you can experience this in real life. And this happened to me one time. I'm going to run through a couple of slides. We're going to look at some pretty pictures of birds here. We're going to talk specifically about these birds, what they represent. On each of these next 3 slides, the yellow star, I've placed it over San Antonio so that you have a reference point for these range maps. These were all lifted from eBird. They're associated with the species on the slide, in this case, barred owl. So we can see that barred owls, very much an eastern distributed species within Texas and the United States. We're going to do the same exercise here with a varied bunting. In Texas, at least, it's a very western distributed species, southwestern US, kind of peters into Mexico. And then we'll wrap it up with this Morelet seed eater, which you can see from this map. This is a very southern distributed species, very much a Mexican species. But at one place, at one time, without lifting my foot, I saw all 3 of those animals at the same time while birding. And that occurred right there in Del Rio, Texas, along San Felipe Creek a couple of years ago, and I remember it resonating with me as a moment where I was living this map, where these animals that represent completely disparate portions of the United States, of Mexico, east, west, south, were all coming together in one place at one time for one experience. And you can play this game. Well, let me get into this for a second. It's just like this map really just illustrates that incredible amount of diversity within the bird groups. You can see the Texas coastal plains and the Texas coast lighting up super warm, illustrating all of that diversity. You can kind of make it out that it's fairly warm going back into central Texas. And then you have some hot spots back there towards California and the Chiricahua Mountains. But you can play this game with herps too. So this is a timber rattlesnake. You can see San Antonio clearly outlined there. These maps were lifted from iNaturalist, which is kind of like another eBird, a lot of herpers and folks that like to look at insects and other species. Even birds will throw their information in there. A little bit more limited. Usually each observation is a single species and you're throwing a photograph in there to provide some sort of verification. But so this map was lifted from eBird a couple of years ago, or from iNaturalist a couple of years ago. This is a timber rattlesnake. You can see that it is a very eastern distributed species within Texas. And then you can see here the eastern black-tailed rattlesnake. Although it's named eastern, it is a western distributed species within Texas. And then we'll wrap it up with the Texas indigo snake, a southern distributed species within Texas. And you can potentially find each of those animals in a single county in the state, and that's your county, Bexar County. So we have some historical records of timber rattlesnake associated with the San Antonio River bottoms. They are probably extirpated from that corridor now. There are still some populations hanging on back towards Guadalupe Gonzales County. We certainly have eastern black-tailed rattlesnakes. If you want to see those, you can go walk along the Cibolo, the dry portion of Cibolo north of town, or go to the Government Canyon State Natural Area. There's pretty healthy populations there. And Texas indigo snakes, I'm not certain, but I do believe that they run around fairly close to Mitchell Lake Audubon Center. I believe I have some secondhand observations, but no firsthand. But super interesting. Same sort of exercise. You have 3 species completely associated with different regions of the United States, different regions of Texas, and they can all converge at a single point to illustrate this reality that we live, this wonderful reality that we live, that Texas is a place where that ecoteams meet, those different ecoregions meet, and they bring with them the species that represent them. So there's a map that just shows you how hot reptile diversity is in Texas. It's amazing. All right, taking a quick breath. I'm moving quick, guys. I hope you're taking notes. We can. I'll be happy to answer lots of questions at the end of this. We're going to move fast. So I'm going to reference a report that I got a hold of from like 2010 or maybe even a little bit earlier. So this information's a little bit dated, but I'll talk through it. Texas, compared to all of the other 49 states, or all 50 states in the United States, has the second highest species diversity and the third highest number of endemic species, meaning those species which occur only and entirely within the boundaries of Texas. Now we rank third because Hawaii has a ton of endemics. Like basically everything that's in Hawaii is endemic to Hawaii because it evolved or adapted there. And so you don't really compete with Hawaii in that. And California just ekes us out a little bit in both that highest species diversity and endemic species number. But we do have the highest bird and reptile diversity. And some people say, whoa, California beats us on birds. But I would argue, and I have not done this math, but I would argue that if you're looking at those species that regularly use the state as part of their natural life cycle, whether it's breeding, resident, overwintering, or migrating through, I bet Texas does beat California, but I'm not going to put a lot of money on it. and that California's list is bolstered by, just like ours, by a bunch of vagrancy. And we have the second highest number of mammals and plants. What about snakes? Kind of digging in on snakes here. We have about 80 total species of snakes in Texas, 12 of which are venomous species. We have 4 out of the 5 U.S. Families of snakes representative of the U.S., including the blind or thread snakes, advanced snakes, which is our largest group. That's basically all of them. It's a catch-all. And then we have old world fixed fangs, which are our coral snakes, kind of related to cobras, and New World pit vipers, which are super evolved, just like this rattlesnake here on the screen. We have 1 or 2 endemic species of snake in Texas, depending on what the taxonomists, whoever published last. They sometimes lump concho and Brazos water snake together. Sometimes they're split. For purposes of my year, they were split so that I could count 2 species, but I did only find 1. So it didn't necessarily matter. Conservation challenges, and we have a lot to celebrate. We spoke to the diversity, the wildlife diversity, the incredible richness of species we have in birds and reptiles and amphibians, but we also have a parallel track of conservation challenges in our state. This map, it simply illustrates where we're seeing land conversion occur at the highest rate. So we've benefited for decades, for 100 years plus, by having a bunch of ranchers operating and owning land, locking out, special interest development and other things. But we have just started to suffer. I mean, we've been suffering for years and decades. Land conversion, taking these working lands, these open spaces that are otherwise serving as refugia for wildlife, and we're turning them into development. We all need infrastructure. A lot of this development is occurring out of necessity. We got a growing population. I would say an equal amount of development is occurring out of a lack of thoughtfulness. We're not doing a great job of balance when we're growing. If we did, we would probably not be suffering so much from conservation challenges. But we can see that the biggest growth areas in the state, the biggest land conversions occurring in the state, are associated with the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, the I-35 corridor, including Bexar County, the Houston Metroplex, and then we're also seeing it over here in El Paso. I would also point to the Permian region and some stuff down here in South Texas. With Texas's growth, we're projecting to go from about where we are now, getting close to 30 million people in the state of Texas, to about 50 million people, almost double within a short couple of decades. And we believe that most of that growth is going to occur in this triangle that I'm drawing on your screens right now. This is the Texas triangle. So we're going to add about 20 million people to this area right here. That's going to cause even more conversion, development, and land use infrastructure in those areas and peripheral to them, but it's going to also pull resources from the hinterlands adjacent to those regions. It will have an impact even in places that we believe are not feeling pressures from development and growth. So we just got to think about it. It's not necessarily a problem we can't grapple with. It's just that we have to be thoughtful in how we develop and how we balance quality of life that is bringing the people here. We're all aware, or should be. If you're not, then you missed it, or you had your head in the sand. The 3 Billion Birds report released in 2019 is telling us that over the last 5 decades, we've lost 3 billion, nearly 3 billion individual birds from the population. So if it was 10 billion in 1970, in 2020, we're at 7 billion. So about 1 in 4 birds are now gone, that decrease in numbers. And those decreases don't hit birds evenly across the different groups or assemblages. So for instance, we can see from this map that shorebirds are down about 37%, land birds down 27%. Some birds like waterfowl are up We can get a little bit more detailed, and here's some pretty graphics to tell the story. Grassland birds are the most heavily impacted group of birds out there, with that have suffered over 50% losses. And we focus a lot of attention in my programs at Audubon, Texas, and within our partnerships on working with landowners that operate grazing lands to improve habitat for these animals, because they are really suffering. We know eastern forest birds are down about 17%, and migratory birds overall are down about 28%. But there's some stories to celebrate too. We know that there's been some incredible recoveries, usually from different conservation models. Waterfowl is a great example. Sportsmen and sportswomen putting their money where their hearts are. They like to take ducks and waterfowl and huntable species, but they use their funding and influence to preserve sustainability of that activity, which has also increased the amount of protected habitat, restored habitat, which has also brought up the population. So they've done incredible work through the Pittman-Robertson Act, where there's a certain amount of money that comes out of every purchase of ammo, firearms, that will go to a pot that is distributed back to the states to manage for huntable species, not just birds. But the duck stamp. The duck stamp is another huge important financial tool for conservation. Raptors. I think the story here, 200% growth over the last 5 decades. I think the story here is that we can thank Rachel Carson for awakening the social conscious of the United States to the dangers of chemical use, DDT, and to our technological and innovation for creating chemicals that, they're still using chemicals in agriculture, but they're using chemicals that aren't quite as bad and have allowed for recovery. I think the story with woodpeckers, I can't be certain here, but I'm projecting what I think I know, is that forestry practices have gotten better, but we've also done a really good job of incorporating urban forestry. We're bringing forest back into neighborhoods. Those trees are now, in a lot of the older neighborhoods, have grown and matured to the point where they're having nesting cavities and they're getting bored by beetles and grubs, and these are supplying food and shelter for woodpeckers. We got a lot of species at risk in the state of Texas. And going back to that same report I was referencing early, 2002, about 10% of all species are at some level of risk of becoming threatened or endangered. It is certainly an older report. I like to look at today's report, which is driven by stakeholders in Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, the Texas Conservation Action Plan. This is a great document. It's freshened up every 5 years, and within it, we talk about the conservation pressures, opportunities, make some recommendations on how to improve conditions, but we also identify those species at risk, and we call them SGCNs, which stands for Species of Greatest Conservation Need. When we look at the 1,300 species that are listed in the Texas Conservation Action Plan, we see 18 snake species, or about 24%, close to 24% of all of the snakes that exist out there. And if you can look at the birds, 110 species of bird are listed in that document, which represent about 20% of all of those species that are regularly occurring, like those ones I mentioned earlier, overwintering, resident, breeding, or migratory. And what exactly is an SGCN? They're not endangered and threatened species, although that's included and lumped in as an SGCN. But an SGCN is simply a species whose population is downtrending through time. And at some point, it hits a threshold where we become concerned about it. And if we can act when that decline is here, we might be able to use voluntary tools and limited financial resources to incentivize conservation in a way that doesn't invoke regulation or burdensome costs. So we want to avoid listings by keeping common species common. So if we can intervene here where the cost is probably low and the return is probably high, we see that as a huge win as opposed to listing. Now, we're not averse to listing animals that need to be listed, That's not the point, but we want to recognize when they're downtrending and get in front of the issue if we all can. All right. Whew. That was a little bit of an overview of the greatness of Texas, the biodiversity, our rich natural heritage, and some of the conservation wins and some of the conservation challenges. The remainder of this will be simply herps and the Herping Texas 2021 project that I took on voluntarily and of my own volition. The first question that I often get about why would you do a herping big year? It was simply born of it was a passion born of COVID delirium. We were all inside being careful, being thoughtful, being good community members, not trying to spread the bug around. But at some point we recognized that I can't sustain this. What is an activity that gets me out? How can I do something safe, but also meaningful? So COVID delirium led to me thinking about this project in a lot of ways. But also I was inspired by a Herps of Texas project hosted by the Texas Parks and Wildlife Nature Trackers, using the iNaturalist database, community science database. They hosted a one-year challenge for any field herper that could find and document and upload observations of 100 species of herp in Texas. They would create the Century Club. And so in 2017, they created a Century Club, said anybody can find 100. At that time, I thought, that's a big number. Like that may be pretty tough, a bit insurmountable for your average field herper. But my wife and I took a crack at it, and I barely made it across the 100-yard threshold or the 100 species threshold that year. And I thought, well, how far could you go? I also picked up photography around 2020, 2019, right before COVID. And I figured that this would be a great opportunity to really sort of develop the hobby, maybe get better at it. I skipped over continuing education. There's no better way to learn than to do and to see and observe with your own eyes. Combine that with whatever you can read in your field guides or pick up from your friends. And it probably really sinks in a lot better than it would otherwise. And then I really wanted to amplify conservation communication across all of the species, but particularly for these, because just like Patsy said in the intro, an often misunderstood and maligned group of animals. Sometimes you say the word snake and you see someone physically shiver. There's a visceral reaction. Understandable. And I'm not trying to like turn everybody over to being a big frog hugging person, but if we can just incrementally move some people, that's going to be so much better for the species. And if you know an animal, you probably have a higher likelihood of caring about an animal. If you care about an animal, then you will advocate for the animal. So that was the hope. The rules of my herping big year, because there was no model to follow. There's no set of rules. There's no like HBA or AHA or whatever that sets out some rules. So what I try to do was to mirror those that we typically see in the birding world as best I could. For me, I tried to get some form of documentation for every species I saw, most often a photograph. In some cases, particularly with anurans or frogs or toads, I can record a vocalization because just like birds, it could be very specific. And I can take that to another field herper and they say, yeah, that's a this, and we agree on that. However, I wasn't able to get documentation of every species. So I have a few animals that are dirty herps, and those are the ones I didn't get a photograph or I didn't get a recording. And I allowed myself, I said, you know what, I'm going to include them in the list. I'll denote them. If anybody wants to disqualify them later, they'll have the notes, they can do that. But I certainly am, I think, amongst the herping world and certainly amongst my friends and peers, a trustworthy person. So I only had 3 dirty herps. I do allow roadkill. This is a technique that's often used to be informative. These are animals that are not as abundant often, that aren't as active year round. And so you take what you can get, and it is still informative. It still tells us information about distribution, maybe natural history, we get genetic data from that. So although it's not desired, I did note it, and I did have a few species that were only observed, particularly snakes, as roadkill. Group herping, perfectly fine. However, you got to be with the group. You can't say, hey, I'm going to join y'all a couple hours later. If you find something, hold it for me, and then I can take a picture of it and count it. Got to be actively pursuing herps with your friends, just like birding. Somebody sees some rare warbler, calls you over, you can put it on your list. I played the same game. And I did allow for naturalized exotics on my list. So those reptiles and amphibians that are introduced, exotic or otherwise exotic, but have established bona fide populations or reproducing at some point in the state, we'll go ahead and count them. Yeah, but we'll note them too. I prepared, game planning, read my field guides, couple of good books, some blogs. Man, I really kind of developed over the years a trusted group of friends and acquaintances in the field herping community. I've gotten to know quite a few researchers and count some of those folks amongst my really good friends. Followed the relevant social media accounts, particularly in Texas. I got to know a few people through social media. It's an interesting tool. It's one that could just take away your whole day, but also can give you stuff. It's how you use it. And I also launched a blog and website, and I list it there, www.moderntexasnaturalist.com, with the intent of regularly providing check-ins, and here's what I'm doing, sharing photographs and stuff. I made like 3 posts in March and stopped. Just did not keep up the habit, but I did. And I want to mention this. I'm sorry, I'm all over the place, but I wanted to mention this. Anybody that wants to enter into this world, here's a book. It's not super technical. It's more of like an adventure blog, a really long adventure blog about herping around Texas, pursuing certain critters. Not incredibly rich about natural history or anything like that. It's not like a field guide. It's a lot of storytelling. But I found it to be a really fascinating and fun read. We set some goals before the year started. Maximum herp diversity, just like any birding big year. I didn't have a really good barometer to go off of. I couldn't find a high water mark out there. We know that in Texas, a lot of times if you're doing a birding big year, you got to go over 500 species. And as John McIntyre did this year, he broke the state birding big year record. I think he got about 522. I don't have those, I didn't have references to who has these high numbers before. So I set a goal for me that I thought was like, hey, this is manageable. I'm a full-time employee. I know where to go. I wanted to improve on my historic numbers. So I said 125 will be my goal, and I'll set one aspirational at about 150. And 150 was based on the only high water mark I saw, which was a friend of mine named Connor Adams that did during that 2017 Century Club herping big year on iNaturalist, did about 140 species. So I said, well, maybe I could beat his number. And so I threw 150 up there because it was sort of round. Also wanted to see 10 new life species, 10 lifers. I wanted to share the adventure with the Modern Texas Naturalist blog and website. Probably failed at that. But although there's 2 really good ones on East Texas salamanders, if you want to check it out, including some videos that I made. And then I wanted to grow a social media audience and following using my Instagram and Facebook accounts. And then on Instagram, utilizing the hashtag I created, HerpTX21, HerpTexas21. The point there was consistency and engagement. And I think I accomplished that. I throughout most of the year, I posted at least 3 photographs and a vignette associated with that photograph from the herping big year. You can see this map, which illustrates roughly every observation that I uploaded in iNaturalist, every observation of reptile or amphibian that I uploaded in iNaturalist throughout 2021. And you can see that I got all over the state. I was in El Paso, up in northwest of Lubbock. I was over here at Hagerman. I was in the deep woods of East Texas, all the way down to Sable Palm Sanctuary, at nearly the southernmost point of Texas. The first half of the year had to be opportunistic for me. I had a lot of work obligations. Work has to come first. I got 9 to 5. You want to keep your employer happy, particularly when you work for such a wonderful conservation organization like mine. So first half of the year, which kind of stinks because the spring is one of the best times to get out there and do some of this stuff. But the good thing is that my work necessarily brought me into the field often during the spring to help perform and lead bird surveys at beautiful places like Dolan Falls Preserve, Independence Creek Preserve, Love Creek. So I got to do a lot of really good travel associated with work. However, it limited me mostly to the Edwards Plateau ecoregion. And just by the way, we were chasing black-capped vireos, helping out with that post-listing monitoring effort. The state park, although it's not the closest to me, it's the one that's most important to my heart. This is where I did my master's thesis studying reptiles and amphibians and mammals. Palmetto State Park's about 40 minutes from my house, so I would often go there. There's a goodly number of reptiles and amphibians there. So that was always really great, particularly at the beginning of the year. Raise your hand, volunteer, use some of your volunteer time to do research projects, especially if you got friends that are looking at cool things that might otherwise be hard to see. They can kind of get you behind the gates or get you into the points or help you use the techniques that are required to find some of these animals. Weekends and vacations were almost exclusively dedicated to herping. Thankfully, I'm married to a goddess of a woman that not only allows me to pursue this activity, but also encourages me and joins me. Like, she's right there. Like, sometimes she's frustrated when I get to go do something that she can't because she has, I have more vacation than her or something like that. So I had a great, what I call ride or die, that kept me going. And in a lot of cases, when I was really dragging tired, she'd help me get packed and keep me functional. And I'll just point out that although maybe not got an observation in every ecoregion of the state, I have hit every ecoregion of the state during the course of this big year. So all 12. Here's the results. The results are, and remember, my aspirational goal is 150. We knocked it out of the park. We finished the year with 178 species. And I broke it up into the different types of animals within, the different groups of reptiles and amphibians. And what you see in parentheses is the number of lifers within that group that I acquired. So my goals, again, were 125 normal, 150 aspirational with 10 life species. Well, we got 178 species total, 18 species of salamander, including 10 lifers, 35 species of frog and toad, including 6 lifers. There's only 1 alligator in Texas. 24 species of turtles, which are almost all of them, by the way. I missed like 2 or 3. 6 lifers, 44 species of lizards, including 8 lifers, and 56 species of snake, 8 lifers. So for a total of 38 lifers, it was fantastic. And that's a 5-line skink in the picture. I'm not doing a really great job of telling you what we're looking at. I'll try to pick that up a little bit. My biggest misses, the ones that hurt the most, and I'll kind of go through them one by one, tell you quickly about them. The eastern hognose snake, one of the most common snakes out there. They're like, you can't go very long without stumbling across one. I couldn't find one to save my life. Not a dead one, not a live one. There's an eastern hognose snake and there's western hognose snake, which are actually, right now split into 2 different species. The Mexican hognose snake and the plains hognose snake. And I found both of those, and they're both sometimes much more rare than the eastern hognose snake. But that's the one I couldn't find. Prairie king snake, because it's another fairly common snake. I should have been able to find either road killed or under any of the boards that I flipped over the year. I mentioned desert grassland whiptail, not because it's common and not because it's commonly even known to be in Texas, but because I was all the way in El Paso looking for a couple of lizards, found them, and completely forgot to even look for this thing. So we get the 9-hour drive home to Austin, and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's another whiptail. And whiptails are not incredibly difficult to find if you just get into the right habitat at the right time. We just bombed them. That was in late October, and there's no way. I actually mentioned to my wife one time, I said, maybe I should fly back out to El Paso, and we both said, no, there's just no way. Black spotted newt Pretty rare species of greatest conservation need, state threatened. That's a South Texas species associated with these ephemeral wetlands that fill up after wet periods, and they can get active. Most of the time they spin underground. We have them at Sable Palm Sanctuary and a couple other places throughout the valley. I even went with some researchers to some pretty decent spots, just never found one. And I tried. I've 6 different trips this year where I could have found them and never did. I did get to see them. The picture in the top right is a pair that I got to see at the Gladys Porter Zoo down in Brownsville. Strecker's chorus frog is a declining species in the state of Texas, species of conservation concern, but it's pretty common on a couple of ranches that I've worked on right here near Austin. And I never got out on those cool, like late winter, early spring mornings when it's rained a little bit and those things are just calling. They sound like crosswalk signs, like beep, 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 beep. They typically can be pretty easy to find. You just got to have the right conditions. I was lazy that spring period. I was just running and gunning, doing bird stuff, and just anyway. And then last, I'll just say as a bonus, Barton spring salamander. It's one of these rare spring salamanders. This is an endangered species, but it occurs at a few springs, including some that I have access to on ranches here in Central Texas. However, I did not take advantage of the wetter period of the year when springs are flowing really well. And when I went in December and everything's dry and some of these springs weren't pumping water very well, I just could not find any. And I didn't want to trouble the city of Austin on short notice to go to one of their little honey holes. Here's a list of all of the snakes that I saw this year.
Only before you go, somebody wanted to know what was the animal on the lower right in the previous one.
Thank you. I was going to glaze right past it because that's an important story. This is a photograph that I took at Sable Palm Sanctuary that Audubon, Texas owns and is managed by the Gorga Science Foundation, a partner of ours down in Brownsville. I went down, I'm doing a project at this site, and I am doing some sampling to inform a baseline documentation report that I'm creating. It's all to say that I'm doing a lot of investigation down there. And I set out some traps to catch what this is a lesser siren. And in the valley, they grow quite a bit bigger, and there's some thought that they might be a different species, although I think the genetics plays out that they're just a variation of the lesser siren. Anyway, the story here is that even though this animal has external gills and can breathe underwater just fine, they will drown themselves. And in my traps, I had set out just fine. Unfortunately, it rained 3 inches overnight, and the level of the water went above this one trap in particular. And so when I checked it, I had 2 live and 1 drowned siren. This is a drowned siren. They would not pose like this. This was a collected animal. I gave it to the university down there, University of Texas Rio Grande Valley, and it was transferred to UT to my friend Travis LeDuc for deposit. It was a really sad day. It's probably the saddest thing that happened this whole year because of a species that's pretty rare or uncommon, a species of concern. One that's beautiful. It looks like an eel. It's really an amphibian. They have little tiny stubby Tyrannosaurus Rex legs up here. So it wasn't all peachy. This was a really sad day for me. All right, moving on to snakes. I saw 195 live snakes, which really doesn't seem, when I reflect back on that, it's not terribly many, but I was looking for everything else. So if I really focused on snakes, we probably could have went, much higher. And you can see that the species that are in red, those are species that I found only as roadkill throughout the year. So there's no number associated with them. But if I could faithfully identify the animal, I included the number that I saw, the number of individuals that I saw, and the total was 195 live snakes. And you can see that the most commonly observed species was the Western diamondback rattlesnake. You would think that, so here's cat-eyed snake. Like I saw 4 or 5 of those, but I saw 4 or 5 of those under a single sheet of 10, like one time. So like they are not abundant. You don't see those very often. And that was actually a life or an incredible experience to see your first animal, but actually to see multiple. under one piece of refugia. So anyway, it's just kind of an interesting graphic. I'm going to just keep bouncing along so that we don't go overly long. The next phase.
What was the snake in the picture? What was the snake in the picture?
Yeah, that's a salt marsh snake. Gulf salt marsh snake. This one right there. We saw a handful of those over at McFadden near Beaumont, McFadden National Wildlife Refuge. There's a lot of hybridization that occurs with this species between it and the banded water snake over there. So to find one that was relatively intact and didn't show hybridization characteristics was pretty unique that particular day. All right. I'm going to jump through this. I'm going to blaze through these. We might skip some if we're going to, like Patsy, just give me a signal if we need to wind it down, like 5-minute clock or something. But this is a series of photographs that is that are just represent the process of photography and some of what I call selects and vignettes. So I'll just go through them, share them with you. All of them are labeled, and maybe a very short couple of sentences as a vignette as to what we're seeing. But like, I was amazed, kicking off with the marble salamander, I was amazed by the salamander, the large salamander diversity in East Texas. So we have this marbled salamander and then the spotted salamander. These are a couple of animals that engage in like this migration experience where, you know, before the rain or when cued by the winter rains, and those winter rains are going to start filling ephemeral wetlands that are otherwise dry to this point in time. When those pools start to fill up, these animals emerge from the ground and migrate to them to perform all of their breeding. So it's really an interesting thing, and it occurs during the winter, late fall through winter and early spring, depending upon the rains. It's such a fascinating natural history. Here, one of the more rare salamanders that we have in the state of Texas called the dusky salamander. This one's associated with sort of sloped, spring-fed streams in far East Texas, a habitat that is becoming more and more challenged because of groundwater pumping, because of habitat disturbance, because of invasive species muddying up. So you're looking for really clean, clear water running through semi-mesic sloped areas, and you may find this critter. And it's very similar to what we find in Central Texas, the western slimy salamander. I have a photograph of, which is much more common. Just your old common green anole, plain brown. This was taken at Palmetto in late winter. It's a cold day. I think when they're colder, they're more often found to be brown like that. This is a giant toad. Some people may still call them cane toads. A lot of people hear cane toad and they think like this is an exotic species. They don't belong here when you kill them off. Very invasive and aggressive. But we actually, in Texas, this is a native species to far South Texas, and they have this crazy call, and they're huge. I mean, bigger than my face. And that's a way to describe it. Yeah, bigger than my face. But I want you to notice in this photograph, this was my lifer. I remember seeing it. It was pretty cool to me, and I didn't know that. I thought was guilty of thinking like, are they exotic? Are they native? But this one that I found at Resaca de la Palma State Park, like all of its toes had been eaten off, and it's got exposed bones. It was like, it didn't look great. And I don't know what that is, probably some sort of disease or something, I would assume. But some people thought maybe, I found it in water, maybe some fish were eating off just the tips of its toes. I don't know what to make of it, but really an incredible species. The ring-necked snake. This is just an incredible animal. Very, very small, diminutive animal, but it's got a really cool defensive posturing and mechanism. See how it's curled its tail in the background of this photograph here with a super bright underside, letting me know like, hey, I'm bad. You don't want to mess with me. But otherwise, a beautiful, very, very beautiful snake. One that I was very happy to find. This was along the Devil's River region. And then speaking of the Devil's River, this photograph taken in front of Dolan Falls, which is where I'm going to be tomorrow morning. After tonight, we'll drive out there. This is the Rio Grande cooter. You see, I'm playing with photography here. Like I'm trying to catch habitat and these sorts of things. You're trying to see in the process. This is that western slimy salamander that I mentioned earlier. This was at the Love Creek Preserve. Caught this photograph when we were out there doing some black-capped vireo surveys. Really cute animal. Rich Kostecki was the one that put me on this one. If anybody knows Rich. This is a property that I've been involved with, helped take care of the wildlife for over 12 years in Real County called Moonfire Ranch. And I was like, man, I really hope to see a Baird's rat snake. And I found this Baird's rat snake about 10 feet up a wall behind a bat box that was just kind of like cracked a little bit. And I don't know how it got up there first off, but it wedged itself behind there and had 3 bats inside of it. I let it do its thing for a while, digest its bats, and then picked it up and took it somewhere else and took some photographs. This is the first western diamondback rattlesnake that I found this year. This was at the Barton Creek Wilderness Preserve here just outside of Austin. I almost stepped on it as I was walking up to a bird survey point, and this animal was so cool. I'm probably within about 18 inches of this animal with a lens. So cool and chill. I actually did something I don't normally do. I don't ever really like to risk myself. I'm pretty risk averse with venomous snakes, but this one, I just felt like we had a thing and it worked. And that'll probably be the last time I ever do the thing, but that is a really close up shot. Coral snake from my neighborhood. Beautiful, showing off all those bright colors. Fascinating story with this. So you've probably seen spotted whiptails. They occur throughout most of the state, but there's about, there's almost like 10 different species of whiptail and race runners in this group of fast lizards. But what's super interesting is that not this particular species, but about 6 or 7 of those species are parthenogenic, and which means that they're all women, they're all female. It's an all female group of animals, of species, and every baby born is a clone of the mother. It's super, super interesting natural history, one that you like, how do they even do it? It's fascinating to read up on. All female species of lizards that is capable of reproduction, but the babies are clones of the mother. Here's an emery rat snake that I found inside the plantation house at Sable Palm Sanctuary while I was working down there. I like that photograph. Also at Sable Palm, the Mexican tree frog, which is a species of frog. It's a lot like gray or Cope's gray tree frogs that we have throughout most of the state, except this is limited, range restricted to deep South Texas along the Rio Grande Valley. At one point, it is a species of greatest conservation need. It was state threatened at one point, but I think we took it off the list recently. This is probably one of my favorite observations, the Mexican burrowing toad. I don't have a recording. Write down this Mexican burrowing toad and go listen to it call. It's an incredible call. Super fat. This animal filled the entirety of the palm of my hand. And it felt like, if any of y'all remember or had children or grandchildren or were alive at this point yourself as a kid, whenever we grew up, we had this green slime, Nickelodeon gack is what it was called, I think. And you just threw this slime in your hand, you played with it, but you jiggled it. And jiggling this animal in my hand felt like jiggling gack from when I was a child. It's a really incredible experience, a super interesting species. What is even more fascinating to me, this is a species that is incredibly range restricted in Texas. So in the entirety of the US, it's only represented in like 2 counties, Texas, deep South Texas. So we got an animal that's incredibly range restricted within the state. And all of that land's behind private gates and fences. So there's not anywhere there's no state park that you can go to find this animal. And it only comes out of the ground when there's like 3+ inches of rain. So 3+ inches of rain doesn't occur very often in the Rio Grande Valley. Combine that with an incredibly range restricted species, and you just like all these things that stack on top just have to be perfect. And so you remember when I told you I accidentally drowned the lesser sirens earlier? Well, the next night I got to go out and look for that, because that 3-inch rain brought these animals out, and we worked for hours to be able to find one that was in a bar ditch off the side of the road and not behind a fence to be able to take this photograph. This was an incredible experience for me. Speckled racer only occurs in a couple of counties in deep South Texas from Sable Palm. This is probably the most beautiful snake in the state of Texas. I don't have great photographs of them, but if you can make it out, this like turquoise dotting in each scale on a black base, or it might have it vice versa, but incredibly inquisitive snake. They see you, they kind of periscope up, they look at you. You don't bust that bubble, but as soon as you bust that bubble, they're gone. They're fast, that's why they're called racers. But gorgeous snake, deeply coveted by the herping community to see one of those. Plain-bellied water snake. This is at Hershey Ranch. This is a ranch that my wife and I helped manage with in Gillespie County near Fredericksburg for Dr. Andy Sampson. And there's a big LBJ era lake out there, reservoir, soil conservation reservoir. So we see a few species out there, and I was just practicing some kind of landscape and wildlife shots. But this is just a plain-bellied water snake, one of the most common snakes in the state of Texas. Another super common species also shot at Hershey Ranch, the western ribbon snake. This is the concho water snake. This one's this is that endemic species I was mentioning earlier. You're only going to find this on the Colorado and Concho rivers, generally above the hill country, back towards the headwater sources. This was on, I think this was on Lake Ivy. I did not go pursue the Brazos water snake. Its sister taxa, the one that's kind of lumped sometimes it's split. This is my first Texas horned lizard that I found during the year. This was back in April or May. I can't remember what month. This is a red spotted toad I took as the sun's setting over at Independence Creek Preserve. This is a deserty, arid lands toad. Really cool. Scientific name ends with punctatus, and we always tease that they do kind of look grumpy like punks. Not this one. He looks like he's smiling with the sun setting, but a round-tailed horned lizard. We have 3 species of horned lizard, you'll see. So we've seen 2 of them so far. The round-tailed horned lizard is fairly common where it occurs in West Texas and a little splotch along maybe not too far from Laredo in South Texas. A mottled rock rattlesnake. So this is one of our smaller kind of western distributed rattlesnakes in the state of Texas. We've got 9 species of rattlesnake. Or 8 species of rattlesnake in Texas. And I found all of them this year. I did hit the rattlesnake cycle this year. This is the smallest of our rattlesnakes, probably the hardest to find, the western pygmy rattlesnake. And it is tiny. And it has very underdeveloped rattle. So you can't really make it out until you put your ear up to it. And you don't want to do that either. So we did put it into a bucket, and then which served as a reverberation chamber so that we could hear the tiny little buzz. Really cute animal. Mexican spadefoot toad, another animal that spends a lot of time underground, but is cued by wetter monsoonal periods in West Texas and the Panhandle. One of my favorites, Texas banded gecko. Beautiful, beautiful species. So kind of like a blondish phase of the eastern black-tailed rattlesnake. I found this one on Black Gap Road, my wife and I. My buddy, I've got a really good friend named Greg that one weekend we said, there's a huge system over the Panhandle. Everything that I would hope to see might be out during this. Let's just go. We launched it like after work on Friday and drove for 7 hours, hit the middle of the storm, white knuckled it through the storm. But on the other side of it, it was just gangbusters with spadefoot toads and frogs and other toads. And eventually it did take a while, but we did find the western tiger salamander, which was a big target. We also found the yellow-bellied mud turtle. And when I got back, did a week of work, had another buddy come with me, and we drove down to Padre Island National Seashore to go look for the legless lizard, the glass lizard. So you know why this is a lizard and not a snake? You can kind of just make out a little bit of an ear hole. And if you threaten to touch this thing's eye, it would shut its eyelids, and snakes don't have eyelids. I don't care what Harry Potter 1 says when the snake winks at Harry Potter, they can't do that. And the reason that they're called glass lizards is that when they break their tail off and it starts banging against other things, it'll just keep breaking and breaking and breaking like glass. It's one of the reasons they call them glass lizards. Super cool. We see them pretty often whenever we go driving around the dunes back there. The spot-tailed earless lizard, really cute individual here, really inquisitive. This is a species of deep conservation concern. They broke up this species into a South Texas population and Edwards Plateau-ish, Central Texas population. And I think that there's some indication that South Texas population may be going towards a federal listing, but we're still really concerned about these guys too. Really, really interesting life history. They need really grazed down habitat. So you get something that's looks like it's been overeaten by cattle is usually can be pretty good for this species. And really splotchy distribution. So they can be pretty tough to find. Our Texas tortoise. Everybody's favorite, the Western or Texas rat snake. If you find a snake in your house, probably 9 times out of 10, it's this one. If you ever look at a snake and you say, I wonder how you got there, it's probably this one. They are like, if the coach whip and the racers are like the greyhounds of the world, like these are like the most incredible like rock climbers and wall climbers that exist. I got to spend some time with Ben Masters and his film team, his group of cinematographers. We did a herpathon out in West Texas where Aaron and my wife and I were brought out to kind of oversee collection of reptiles for the purpose of filming a nature documentary. And which was awesome because I got to collect a bunch of species and then take some really epic photographs, as you can see here, and observe some interesting natural history traits with this ornate box turtle eating some roadkill toad out near Marfa. And Patsy, I'm seeing you come on. Should we go ahead and wind this down? I've only got a couple more. Okay. I'll just mention a couple more and then we'll just, I think I've only got like 3 more slides anyway. So this is a 3-toed box turtle. I found this in the middle of Houston in Urban Park where there's a pretty healthy population, and it was also supposed to be eastern hognose snakes, one of my big misses. It amazes me that this is a hard animal, a lot of places to find, but then you go to this urban park in the middle of Houston and they're just, spend a little time, you'll find one. It's fascinating that we can have these refuges that are taking care of animals in the middle of a developed urban environment. And I have so much difficulty finding them out in the woods where they're supposed to be. Big Ben patchnose snake from Black Gap Wildlife Management Area. I found that one while on vacation. A Big Ben slider we saw, and I got the photograph. Had to sneak up. We're very wary turtles. I had to sneak up on this one while I was kayaking up Santa Elena Canyon to do an overnight kayak packing trip. Our mountain shorthorn lizard that I almost missed. I put in almost 30 miles hiking in the mountains in the Davis Mountains looking for this animal before I finally found it at the last, well, actually my wife found it on the last open day at the Davis Mountains Preserve that the Nature Conservancy owns. So way up, almost up towards Livermore. And then a cat-eyed snake from South Texas. I think that might wrap it up. Here's a common garter snake. And I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up with this slide here to say thank you. This is an attempt to be comprehensive. All the people that gave me notes, support throughout the year, contributed to the project in some way. It's a pretty robust list, and I almost certainly left some folks on. And the last slide, the parting slide, the slide to say thank you guys for being here and suffering through an hour. Gosh, I'm so sorry. An hour of me babbling on. Here's some contact info if you're interested in following me on social media. The best one is at Romey Swanson, or now it's romeyswanson.wildlife on Instagram. I will promise to be more active on the Modern Texas Naturalist because I see it as the place to land chapters for the book that I'm going to write about this whole thing eventually. And then I've got a professional email address and have to plug Audubon, Texas down there too. Check it out. All right. I'm sorry. I'm going to stop sharing And for those that aren't asleep or have gone home to go eat, I'm here. I got plenty of time. I got nothing.
I don't think anybody is in that condition right there. You just, everybody's just like, wow, these things are around us. I'm just going to go through some of these questions. Let me go to the top first. That's a woohoo of the big 178. Greg Pastor says that frog hugging is good for the soul, but only if you like warty souls, I guess. I put your hashtag HerpText21 in the chat so people can follow. And just a note, a shameless plug for Bear Audubon, we do sell the duck stamps every year. We don't make a thing off of them, but we make them easy to find because they're not always easy to find otherwise. Here we go. Question, Susan Bolo. When a snake is relocated out of a public area into a more remote location, what is their survival rate?
Yeah, there's sometimes they'll depend on the species. I think there's been some studies that indicate that if you move an animal with like a rattlesnake, say for instance, a rattlesnake, relocate a rattlesnake half a mile away, it's probably going to be okay. 2 miles away is kind of this barrier where it may decline. However, I don't know how well studied those things are. The problem is that you're taking an animal out of a place where it has resources and space and it's carved out a niche to a place where it may not be able to do that, or it may cause the threshold of available resources to be spread across too many individuals and they all kind of suffer. But I don't know, not cutting the head off of a snake and relocating it's better than cutting off the head of a snake. So we'll just kind of go with keeping the snake alive is probably best. Not too far is better than like counties away. But really, so for instance, like people talk about this, like I get asked to relocate coral snakes all the time because I'm like, look, seriously, if you just go inside, go away, you will probably never see that animal again because they like to spend so much of their time underground. They don't want to bother you. They're shy and retiring. So just, case by case basis.
Thank you. Thank you. I had one crawl through my feet. I was looking up at Cipolo Creek.
Lucky you, man. That's great.
And there it came right through my feet. And the person behind me says, don't move. I knew what it had to be, a snake. Went into the wood pile and it was just hunting. And, it wasn't after me. It was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Got a question here. Two that I would like to hear your answers here. How often do you wear snake gaiters or snake boots? Or is that a problem?
I do. I had a pair. I don't anymore. You can imagine you can wear them out, like hiking through where some of the places we do. There are a lot of places, particularly in the dry, arid West, where you can really, if you do a good job, you can pay attention to most places you're going to step. I feel pretty safe not using them. If I'm going through tall grass, I almost certainly wear them. Right now, I don't have a pair because I wore them in salt water too many times and it shrunk the leather and I can't bend my foot enough to make them go on anymore. So I gave them to a friend. I'm in the market for a new pair, but I used most of my money this year, my disposable income, on gas and lenses for the camera. So they'll have to wait.
Understand. Don't go in any tall grass. Okay. The question here, did you have to capture and pose most of the snakes that you photographed?
Yeah, there's two philosophies on this. Some folks do certainly a lot of these photographs were posed. I'm not shy or bashful about stating that. Some of them you would have to put a lot of effort in to capture some of those photographs the way that I did with habitat and to get like really good full length of the snake in a position. But there's some folks that like, maybe this is the next level. They think like, okay, I've done all this, takes great photographs. I want to move into what's called in situ, in situation. I want to take a picture of the animal in its situation. And I like that too. It's two different types of wildlife imagery art. And I think we can appreciate all of them. No one's any better than the other in my mind. Some of mine are in situ, and if anybody has any specific asks, like I'm very, very happy. Like, remember the turtle with the roadkill front? That's in situ. I didn't put that one there. That was it. Mm-hmm. The one with the other turtle posing in front of the sunset, looking pensive, that was posed.
I assume the snake that was inquisitive was not.
Nope, that was in situ.
And we also assume that no herps were harmed in the, other than run over by cars if they were roadkill.
The one that I drowned.
Other than that.
And so you saw that from the list of the snakes that there was probably about 5 species that were only observed as roadkill, and then 1 species of turtle that I only found as a drowned turtle, an alligator snapping turtle in a creek in East Texas on a trot line on a hook. Yeah.
So what's next?
Well, I mentioned
you're gonna write a book.
I really want to start knocking out some chapters, and the idea, I mentioned there's a book called Herping Texas, and it's a great, but it's more like travel log. And a lot of this writing is about like, I went here, I looked for this is the cool picture I took. And I appreciate that. And that genre sort of filled. I was thinking that I would write using the Herping big year as the plot that connects the story. A book whose purpose is really to celebrate the diversity that we have in the state of Texas, the challenges, the things, the wins that we've accomplished, but also to celebrate all of the wonderful private land stewards, the agencies, the organizations, the academia that are all working together, a lot of times unknowingly. I mean, you don't think the Forest Service or Parks and Wildlife is making decisions based on, how's the frog going to respond, but they're managing for animals who serve as umbrellas for these species. So I want to write a book that celebrates all of this great diversity, tells the stories of the Texas story for these animals and the people, the organizations, and the entities that are doing the work on our behalf.
Well, when you get it done, we'd like to have you come back and talk about your book.
You got it. Yeah.
Tell us some more of that. And we had a couple more questions real quick.
Sure.
What % of what you found were not on public areas? That's number 1. And then how do you pose a herp?
I'll answer the second question first. With a lot of patients, snakes, they just don't like to do what you want them to do. And neither do the turtles often. So it's a lot of patience, and sometimes you just get what you get unless you have all day. I'm not a photographer. I'm not a cinematographer. I'm not paid for my photos. I'm not paid for my videos. So, I want to take a great picture. I'll give it a certain amount of time. And if we're not accomplishing it in that certain amount of time, we get what we got, and I got to go because we got to take advantage of the time I have left to go find more species. That may change now. Maybe I will become a photographer. Maybe I will focus on just elite level photography, but I don't know. The first question, a lot of private lands access, a lot of public lands access that aren't publicly accessible because of relationships, because of friends and other field herpers. But a lot of the snakes are actually accomplished on private land via roadways. So in Texas, we have a great allowance where we can hunt reptiles off of public roadways if we have certain permits and endorsements on our permits and wear certain accoutrements like reflective vests and promise not to use lights in certain ways. But if we follow all those rules, we're allowed to hunt from the public roadway, and hunting can include capturing for your personal collection as long as it's not a protected species. You can't do that with birds. You can't do that with deer or turkey or anything like that. So it is kind of a special allowance for this niche group of wildlife.
Awesome. Well, I'll send you the chat, and you can see the hoo-haws and the yahoos and the yay-hays.
Well, thank you.
The wonderful things about the photography and just opening our eyes to the diversity of this group, and also the diversity we have here in our state that sometimes we get kind of closet bound. We're in our little area. Tomorrow we leave for Arizona, and we're going to be going through the western part of Texas, and believe it, we're going to be looking for herps as well as birds.
Please do. And let me know. And anybody out there that has a question, got my email, find me on Instagram or Facebook. Would love to. I love talking about these sorts of things. I mean, I love talking about birds too, guys. So maybe another day we can do the birds.
Well, here's your final quote. Let's do it. It says, I took notes. This is our final quote. Jiggling this animal in my hand, it felt like gack. And then the other one is they're all women, talking about the whiptails and their
All women
parthenogenesis.
whiptail. I think about, like, I don't know if there was a book or something, but I remember like the all women tribe of the Amazonian,
The
whatever.
Amazonian, yeah.
And I think about like, oh, that's a real thing, except it's a bunch of lizards in West Texas.
Well, did you know that they now think that a lot of the monitor lizards, including the Komodo dragon, practice parthenogenesis? So there's so
Texas
much
is
we don't
amazing
know.
because we have the Texas version of every interesting thing that happens probably in the world right here in this state.
Absolutely, absolutely. And a few interesting people as well to go with them.
Oh yeah, there's a few.
Okay, well, you come back again and talk to us about birds, and we just loved it. It was wonderful. And you topped out at about 78 people. And
Cool.
so we'll send
Nice.
you the chat. And for those people who maybe had to come in late working, you know, the curse of the birding and herping classes is work.
Oh,
And
yeah.
we'll have a recording of this. After it processes, we'll put it on our a link on the Bear Audubon page, and you can watch it on our Vimeo.
Oh, cool.
Feed.
I would love to
So,
share that.
okay, you'll get that as well. So
Cool.
thanks once again. And
well, thank you to everyone out there in the digital world for your patience, and I appreciate you, and thank you so much, and thank you, Patsy, for the platform, Bear Audubon, for the platform. You guys are doing great work. Kudos to you, and I love your earrings. I just noticed them.
Well, I wore my snakes just for you.
I see them.
Okay, well, take care, and thanks so much. It says about to go outside and look for some frogs. So
Really?
that's Derek Mims, and boy, if he's looking, he'll see them. He's got eyes like.
There's some that could be out right
Gotta
now.
meet this guy. Okay, so we'll say good night to everyone, and you get off to where you need to go, and so will we. And everybody just get outside. Life's better outside, as Texas Parks and Wildlife says. And everything fits together, so it doesn't matter what you see, it's all important.
Good night, everyone.
See you. Bye-bye. Thanks.